Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer House Resolution 7217, the Israel Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. This bill provides $17.6 billion in emergency supplemental appropriations, which provide needed military assistance to America's great ally, Israel, and support U.S. military forces operating in the region. On October 7, 2023, Hamas carried out a brutal, unprovoked terrorist attack on the people of Israel. The horrific acts committed on this day resulted in 1,200 deaths, thousands injured, and 240 hostages. 136 remain in captivity, and over 30 are believed to be dead. The Israeli people are still reeling from the horrors of October 7th, but have bravely pushed their sorrow aside to root out and fight Hamas and ensure that the people are never threatened again. Last November, the House passed a $14.3 billion supplemental to shore up our ally. The bill included $5.2 billion in missile defense systems such as Iron Dome, David Sling, and Iron Beam, $4.4 billion to backfill U.S. stocks, $1 billion for U.S. munition production such as 155 rounds and small diameter bombs, $3.5 billion for foreign military financing of U.S. systems and munitions, and $200 million for the protection of U.S. personnel and emergency evacuations of American citizens in the region as a result of this conflict. These requirements remain unchanged and are aligned with the Biden administration's supplemental request and are included again in the bill we are considering today. Unfortunately, the situation in the Middle East has continued to deteriorate since November. The Houthis have launched dozens of missile, drone, and boat attacks on military and civil ships in the Red Sea. On January 28th, 3 U.S. soldiers were killed and 40 injured by a drone attack. 3 U.S. soldiers were killed and 40 injured in a drone attack at a military base in Jordan, caused by an Iranian-backed militia. Just this morning, the Houthis fired missiles at 2 civilian ships in Yemen, 1 British, 1 American. We're putting our military in an untenable situation, and attacks continue to escalate. Now we must shore up our ally Israel and provide our military with the resources they need to protect our troops in the region. The new funding in this bill addresses that changing reality by providing $3.3 billion for U.S. military operations in the region funded through December 24. This includes $1 billion for low-cost defensive capability to thwart future attacks on U.S. forces in the region. In many instances, we have been intercepting low-cost Iranian-backed drones with multi-million-dollar munitions. This funding will protect our forces and put us on the right side of the cost curve. This funding bill resupplies Israel's defensive capability, restores American defense industry to replenish our stocks, funds necessary operations for our forces in the region, and sends a strong signal that the United States will not back down. I'm grateful for the support of Chairwoman Granger, Chairman Diaz-Balart, Republican leadership, and dozens of members who have co-sponsored the bill. I'm also grateful for the support expressed by many of my friends across the aisle. We have an opportunity today to come together and send a strong message: the United States stands with Israel. I want to address the position of the Democratic leadership, including President Biden's veto threat. Assertion that this bill plays politics are patently false. Last November, Democrats said they wanted a clean bill. That's exactly what this is. This bill simply provides necessary resources to our closest ally in the region and our own military. I introduced this bill because it's the right thing to do. The only people making it political are those who oppose it. Tomorrow is the 4-month anniversary of the horrific October 7th terrorist attack, an act of war. Israel knows that we stand with them, and today we can send a clear message that we support the efforts to eradicate Hamas and the only way to truly bring peace to the region. Likewise, our American military men and women should know their government stands fully behind them and will respond to these numerous attacks. Terrorists and those supporting them should have no question of American resolve. I encourage all members to support the Israel Security Supplemental and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry.
Your left hand.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. 122 days ago, Hamas terrorists murdered over 1,000 Israelis and at least 30 Americans in cold blood. They took hundreds hostage in the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. President Biden's supplemental funding request for Israel, Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, and for our border has gone all but completely unanswered by this historic do-nothing majority. For months, our colleagues in the majority insisted that any foreign assistance bill must include border policy changes. So spoke Speaker Johnson at the White House several months ago and said we needed a bipartisan border security agreement that would open the door, unlock the door for funds for foreign assistance. Yet, Republicans have rejected a bipartisan bill that would accomplish exactly what they have asked for. While declaring that bill dead on arrival in the House, the majority has opted to consider a bill that we know the president will veto. This is a political stunt that makes it less likely that Israel gets its funds while endangering U.S. national security. This accomplishes nothing and delays aid getting out to our allies and providing humanitarian relief. Our allies cannot wait. Our border communities cannot wait. Our cities cannot wait. I wholeheartedly support funding for Israel. I have written aid to Israel supplemental appropriations over the last several years. However, I cannot support this bill, which falls dangerously short of what this moment calls for. Our allies are facing existential threats, and our friends and foes around the globe are watching, waiting to see how America will respond. Putin is watching, Xi is watching, the Ayatollah Khomeini is watching, Russia, China, and Iran are watching, and our allies are watching. This bill does not provide a penny in humanitarian assistance. We cannot abandon the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of these conflicts, particularly in Gaza. The costs of Hamas's rule over Gaza and the war against Israel are borne by innocent Palestinians. Israel's harsh response has raised these costs further. Families, children are facing unthinkable circumstances, millions facing starvation because of this conflict. No one with clear eyes would say otherwise. Furthermore, if this bill were to become law, there is no path to support Ukraine. We are witnessing the first land war in Europe in a generation. And through inaction, this Congress risks handing a sovereign nation over to a ruthless autocrat, jeopardizing U.S. national security. Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine. If he overtakes Ukraine and moves against a NATO ally, we will see U.S. troops in a ground war. If we do not provide Ukraine with what they need, the ultimate legacy of the 118th Congress will be the appeasement of a dictator and the destruction of a free nation. Our allies and our enemies in Europe and around the globe will know that the United States is no longer a trusted partner in the security of the free world. Yet, we know that a supermajority of this body supports Ukraine. There are unquestionably more than 218 votes in the House for a supplemental appropriations that includes Israel, humanitarian assistance, Ukraine, and Indo-Pacific assistance. Yet, House Republicans are refusing to take that path. The Senate bill acts now to address the border that is in crisis. The status quo is unacceptable, but Republicans say no to moving forward. We should reject this unserious effort, this political ploy, and insist on a bipartisan product that supports our allies and protects the integrity of our border. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. And this is a bipartisan effort. This is a bipartisan bill. And with that, I yield to the gentlewoman from Texas, the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Granger, for 3 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 7217, a bill that will provide additional support for Israel. And I want to thank Chairman Calvert for the leadership on his bill that he's given. Nearly 4 months ago, we watched Hamas brutally attack the Israeli people. Unfortunately, the situation in the region has only gotten worse. Israel and now U.S. forces have been attacked by terrorist groups backed by Iran. Funding is needed to address the growing threats we face. The bill before us provides a total of $17.6 billion in emergency resources. Specifically, the bill includes funding for Iron Dome, David Sling, Iron Beam defense system, and other weapons through the Foreign Military Financing Program. To ensure that U.S. support does not impact our own military readiness, the bill restocks the items we have already sent to Israel. It is also providing $3.3 billion to support our military operations in the region. Now, more than ever, we must stand firm with Israel. The bill sends a strong message that the United States supports our great ally. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the important bill. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee, Ms. McCollum.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Delora. Mr. Speaker, our nation faces two immense national security challenges, and Congress must address them both. Russia's illegal and unjust invasion of Ukraine, which threatens their territorial integrity and the security of Europe, and Israel's response to the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th, which has spiraled into a regional conflict between the United States and Iranian proxies. Tragically, three U.S. service members have lost their lives in this conflict. Our nation and the world need decisive action from Congress. The Hamas attacks on October 7th were barbaric, and Israel does have the right to defend itself. And I've long supported missile defense priorities like Iron Dome in the defense appropriation bill. But this is not the way to get more aid to Israel. The Senate and the White House do not support this action. This bill was introduced to get ahead of the Senate's bipartisan security supplemental, which does address all of our national security priorities. The Republican House bill plays politics with our national security, and that's wrong. It's a non-starter for those of us who seriously want to address these crises in a comprehensive manner. And here's how we do that. We do provide assistance to Israel, but it's equally important to get more life-saving humanitarian aid into Gaza, because if we don't, the situation for civilians will continue to deteriorate. Starvation will grow, disease will spread, and Palestinian civilians, most of them children, will continue to suffer and many die. Because Israel's security situation will worsen if we don't do the humanitarian aid. We need to support our national priorities around the world. Our service members are working nonstop to defend commercial shipping routes and deter broader regional conflicts with Iran. They deserve our support. We must provide additional security assistance to Ukraine. The situation there is desperate, Mr. Speaker. Ukrainian civilians will continue to be murdered. Their military faces serious shortage of ammunition, and we must remedy that. Congress cannot afford to ignore any of these challenges because America cannot afford to ignore them. We must lead, and the Republican majority, in my opinion, is failing to do just that. If we fail here, the national security consequences we will face abroad are: we will leave both Israel and U.S. troops in the Middle East in a more dangerous position when it comes to Iranian activities. We will condemn more Palestinian civilians in Gaza to die. And we will doom the Ukrainian people to face a dark future with their democratic aspirations crushed by Putin's boot. and we will leave our European allies, who have just approved 50 billion euro package for Ukraine, to face a resurgent Russian military on their borders. The majority has left us no choice but to vote no.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. The bill before us today is regarding Israel. We have time to debate Ukraine at a later date, but today this is regarding aid to Israel, which we need to do immediately. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, member of the Defense Appropriations Committee and chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Womack. 2 minutes.
For how long? The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend, Chairman Calvert, for giving me an opportunity to speak on this very vital piece of legislation. It is our solemn duty, Mr. Speaker, our solemn duty to protect our allies and defeat our common enemies. I think we have agreement on both sides of the aisle that we need to do that. October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a brutal attack on our friends in Israel, and we've all seen the carnage and the assessment of damage and the terrific loss of life in Israel. This unwarranted and unprovoked attack was a cruel display of the worst of humanity. We should all agree to that. Israel is a stabilizing force in the Middle East. It has to be supported at all costs. From my time as a commander of forces in the Sinai Peninsula, where I had a close working relationship with the IDF, to my time as a member of Congress in this important subcommittee, I've always been a strong supporter of Israel and will continue to advocate on its behalf. This $17.6 billion appropriated will save Israeli lives. It'll work to defeat Hamas terrorists. The funding will replenish and procure advanced weapon systems, defense articles, and defense services, provide for the procurement of the Iron Dome, David Sling, and Iron Beam defense systems to combat short-range rockets and support U.S. military operations in Israel. In short, Mr. Speaker, we need to pass this bill. And so I encourage all of my colleagues to take a serious look at it, pass the bill, let's get it to the Senate, get it to the White House, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserved. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, the ranking member of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, Ms. Washington
Gentlelady
Schultz.
is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support Israel's absolute right to exist, to defend itself, and to bring home its citizens and ours who are still held captive after 122 days. Over those 122 days, President Biden has firmly backed Israel's response to genocidal Hamas terror. He helped free over 100 hostages and continues working tirelessly to bring them all home. And he has forcefully countered malign forces who attack our troops and oppose any future peace. Meanwhile, for 122 days, Republicans have ignored President Biden's urgent request: safeguard our democracy and our allies from adversaries who seek chaos, death, and destruction. This abdication of responsibility fails our constituents, our allies, and our national security interests. After months of waiting, I won't hesitate to vote for Israel's defense in this moment of crisis. But I'm enraged that Republicans are playing political games, caving to Trump and the extreme fringe of their party at the expense of our most sacred national obligations. They cynically pound the table about Iran, but they're suddenly blind to Putin's wrath in Ukraine and deaf to Xi's threats against Taiwan. They callously disregard the humanitarian tragedy facing Gazans, who are also victims of Hamas, eroding our credibility and undermining future prospects for a just and lasting peace. And I'm appalled that after 3,300 anti-Semitic attacks in this country in just 3 months, they will pass a dozen non-binding resolutions only to turn around and defund basic protections for Jewish Americans. We could have passed the president's emergency request months ago in a massive bipartisan show of strength. But instead, Republicans are needlessly weaponizing these vital efforts to score cheap political points. It took far too long to get here, yet this bill still falls short of our needs. As a Jew, as a proud Zionist, My conscience demands that I vote with Israel in her hour of need in this moment of crisis. But I won't pretend that this bill comes close to meeting our security needs. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Dr. Murphy, 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of 7217, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act. In the face of terror and absolute unprovoked aggression, Israel is in the fight for its existence. The United States must not shirk its duty and must support Israel. Israel has the absolute right to exist. Mr. Speaker, the world is essentially on fire. If you do not combat dictators, if you do not combat terrorists, we are shirking our duty. So today, now, with the United States being Israel's greatest ally, we must support them. We already sent the Senate a support bill. We sent them a support bill for Israel. We did that barely a month after the Hamas attack on October the 7th. But what has Senator Schumer and Senator Democrats done? They've sat on it. And now they want to send us a bill to try to fix their crisis at the border, and guys that will support of Israel. By the way, their crisis at the border, President Biden's crisis at the border, has cost this nation $450 billion. That pales in comparison to the $17 billion that we are asking for Israel. We don't need gimmicks. We don't need a bill that hasn't even been passed by the Senate, which will allow more and more and more illegals to come into this country. What we need is a singular bill to support Israel, our greatest ally. With that, I ask my colleagues to support H.R. 7217. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, a member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Frankel.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill for emergency funding for Israel and for U.S. military operations in the Middle East. On October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists brutally attacked Israel, murdering, maiming, and raping innocent women, men, and children, taking 240 hostages, many who remain in dark tunnels, being starved and abused. And adding fuel to the fire, Iran proxies are shooting rockets into Israel, jeopardizing commerce in the Red Sea, and killing American soldiers on military bases. Funds from this bill will enable Israel to defend itself and the U.S. to protect our own military personnel. Mr. Speaker, I recognize and I respect the concern of friends who support Israel but want other issues also important to be addressed. But, Mr. Speaker, the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. And let me be clear, my vote will be for what is in this proposed bill and not a rebuke of what is left out. I fear that a divided Congress will embolden Israel's adversaries and put our own military in harm's way. Israel's security is our security. I stand with Israel, I stand with humanity, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Lawler, 3 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I rise to show my strong support for this aid package that will support our closest ally, Israel. Providing much-needed assistance for Israel and for U.S. forces in the Middle East region reaffirms our unwavering commitment to democracy, security, and peace in the Middle East. This is a funding package that will enhance Israel's defense capabilities, specifically in the area of missile and rocket defense, with significant allocations for the Iron Dome and David Sling systems, and the innovative Iron Beam system designed to counteract shorter-range threats. All of these are made even more necessary due to Iran's investment in weapons for terrorists around the region, including Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and others. And these groups are expanding their attacks on U.S. troops. This aid package should transcend partisan lines. It is about more than supporting Israel's right to defend itself. It is about securing our strategic interests and showing support for our closest ally, Israel. That's why I was shocked to see that President Biden swore to veto this legislation, which provides our ally Israel with essential aid. There are no policy riders or poison pills. It is a clean bill supporting the state of Israel. This should not be political, and it shouldn't be that complicated. Yet, for whatever reason, Joe Biden has indicated he would veto this bill, and House and Senate Democrats are falling all over themselves to oppose it. It has been 122 days since the terrorist attack of October 7th. The House passed an aid package months ago. The Senate did not act. And according to reports, the Senate may not even have the votes tomorrow to pass their supplemental bill. Therefore, this may end up being the only bill in town. And I just can't understand why my Democratic colleagues, whether you think it's political or not, vote yes. What are you, crazy? I just don't even understand the logic. It's a clean bill. Vote yes. Even ultimately, if the Senate does pass their bill and it does come here, then we'll deal with that. But why would you ever want to be on the record on a clean bill opposing aid to the state of Israel? It's foolish. It's my sincere hope that all of my colleagues will find the moral courage to support this funding package and support Israel in her time of need while providing critical resources to our troops overseas. A little common sense here. Vote yes. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Connecticut, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Himes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank Ms. DeLauro, and maybe I can help my confused friend from New York so that he might understand what is at stake here and why Democrats are going to vote no. I stand here with some trepidation because for a decade and a half I have stood here and proudly voted to support Israel, and Israel has been attacked, and I know that we will pass Israel aid. But make no mistake, what we're seeing today is a profoundly cynical political maneuver. And for my friend from New York, let me explain it. Mr. Calvert, Ms. DeLauro, and I were in the White House when the Speaker, all of 2 days the Speaker of the House, looked at the National Security Advisor and said, we will do border first, Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. He demanded that. The White House said no. We shouldn't bind those things up because that creates the possibility that we don't get any of that done. And then we make very real progress. We have a bipartisan package which does all of those things. It counters Putin's murderousness in Ukraine. It supports Taiwan. It stands with Israel. It provides humanitarian aid. And it offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do a border and immigration deal. An immigration deal that the Border Patrol Union has endorsed. My Republican colleagues trot out the Border Patrol every day and say, look at these poor guys. The Border Patrol Union has endorsed this bill. This should pass. It's a historic opportunity to stand for what we believe as Americans. But then something happened. Donald Trump called. Donald Trump called the Speaker. The Speaker said it. And he said, we know how he feels about Ukraine. And he said, don't do the border deal. A border deal negotiated with one of the most conservative senators in the United States Senate. Mr. Calvert, Ms. DeLauro, and I heard Mitch McConnell say, this is a better deal than we get if Donald Trump is president and we have the House and the Senate. But Donald Trump called. I need to put another name out there. Neville Chamberlain, 1938, peace for our time, because he kowtowed to a dictator. That is what is at stake. We will hang the legacy of Neville Chamberlain around our necks if we don't seize this historic opportunity to do a comprehensive security bill and reject this political, cynical maneuver. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserved. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. The House was excluded from all negotiations regarding the Senate supplemental. And today we're talking about assistance to Israel is needed immediately. I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser, 1.5 minutes.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill authored by my good friend from California, Ken Calvert. This legislation provides additional security assistance to ensure Israel, our greatest Middle Eastern ally, survives the most significant threats to its existence to date. The Jewish people are confronting the unspeakable evil of Hamas, which perpetrated a callous, barbaric attack against the state of Israel and continues to hold more than 132 people hostage in Gaza, including fellow Americans. Israel needs our support to ensure they can win this war and bring every hostage home, as well as counter the other threats to their national security. This bill reaffirms the United States' strong commitment to supporting the people of Israel by providing critical funding to reinforce Israeli defense system and does so without compromising our own readiness. In addition, it ensures our ability to protect U.S. citizens and personnel in Israel. We cannot and must not turn our back on our ally. Doing so would only embolden Hamas, incentivize Iran to continue funding ruthless attacks on Israel, and weaken the security of American personnel in the region, not to mention the harm it would eventually bring to our own nation here at home. We either ensure that Israel has the resources to win, or we are eventually forced to fight the same enemies here. For those who want to annihilate Israel, wish to do the same to America. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Israel is fighting an existential war against Hamas, a death cult dedicated to the genocide of Jews and the annihilation of the Jewish state, while also being attacked by Hezbollah, the IRGC and Iranian proxies, and Houthis. There is no question that the United States must support our ally Israel. But to my colleagues, I say it is folly to think that what is happening now in the Middle East is not connected to what is happening concurrently in Ukraine. If Ukraine falls, the aid we're providing Israel in this bill is only going to be a small down payment to what will be needed when Israel faces a strengthened Hezbollah backed by an emboldened Iran, encouraged by a newly empowered Russia. And the United States will likely need to spend billions of additional dollars stationing more U.S. troops alongside our NATO allies in Europe. We are selling ourselves and our allies short by not taking the responsibility of leadership this country should be taking. And if we don't continue, it's going to cost our kids and our kids' future. It is shameful that the Republicans and Speaker Johnson are using our most important ally, Israel, as a political cudgel. It threatens not only Israel's security, but America's security and our children's future. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would remind my colleague that, in fact, I agree with him for one time. These events are connected, and the connection is the incredibly strategic amount of strategic weakness the Biden administration has shown. That's why Putin invaded Ukraine, and that's why Hamas has gone crazy in Israel. Immediately following the attacks of October 7th, I went to Israel and I witnessed what Hamas did to the Jewish people. And as a retired Navy SEAL combat medic, it put me on my heels. And I will remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that there was a ceasefire on October 6th, that there was a de facto two-state solution on October 6th, and that was broken by Hamas. And unlike the vast majority of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I spent my entire adult life either training for, training others for, or at war myself. So there is a difference between the conflict in Ukraine and what's taking place in Israel right now. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, and he is after territorial gains. Hamas is a group of savages that are after the utter destruction of the Jews as a people. They want to eradicate them. And there are members of the other party who have been censured, member of the other party that's been censured on this floor for grossly anti-Semitic remarks, and that's what's taking place. Do not be fooled by this political rhetoric. I stand with the Jewish people now. I will stand with them from the beginning to the end, so the river to the sea never takes place. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will vote no today on the $17 billion aid package, which provides a blank check to Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and the extreme right-wing government in Israel. How dare Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, have the gall to criticize America while calling for the mass expulsion of Palestinians? I will vote no because this bill includes zero humanitarian aid while children are dying and 400,000 Gazans face famine. I will vote no because this bill undermines human rights and international law, ignoring the recent ICJ decision calling on Israel to do more to protect Palestinian civilians. I will vote no because it is painfully obvious to the entire world that what is needed today is a permanent ceasefire and a release of all hostages. There come moments in a nation's history when our actions reveal our values. This is such a moment. We must stand for stopping the bombing, for ending this brutal war, and for justice in the Middle East, with a Palestinian state with equal rights living side by side with Israel.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. From Connecticut is recognized.
Sorry. I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the chair. Mr. Speaker, more than 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th, and 136 remain hostage. In response, 27,478 Palestinians have been killed, 70% of whom are women and children. And most Gazans today cannot reach a fully functioning hospital. This is not war. This is slaughter. And yet, after all this destruction and devastation, the Netanyahu government is still nowhere close to their stated objective of destroying Hamas. Moreover, the United States has our own requirements outlining the transfer of weapons to forces engaged in gross human rights violations. We have a responsibility to honor those laws, to facilitate a bilateral ceasefire, to move to end this campaign of mass casualty and loss of life that risks bringing the entire region closer to a wider, deadlier conflict. This bill contains $17 billion on top of the billions we already transfer every year with no conditions and no humanitarian aid for the most vulnerable. Everyday Americans should not tolerate this squandering of our resources without oversight on such an inhumane and ineffective operation, especially when we are living paycheck to paycheck and they cannot see their Congress address their most basic material concerns. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Here we go again, sending $17.6 billion U.S. tax dollars with no conditions attached to Netanyahu's extremist government to drop more bombs on innocent Palestinians. The Israeli government has already killed 27,000 people. 11,500 of them were children. I'm tired of my colleagues coming to me whispering, I don't really like Netanyahu. Well, then why are we sending him billions of dollars with no conditions? He literally is telling us over and over again what his intention is. I'm tired of my colleagues coming and whispering to me, Rashida, I support a two-state solution. Great. Then send money that conditions for a two-state solution, because Netanyahu has over and over again told us he never wants to see a Palestinian state. So I'm tired. I oppose Netanyahu's war crimes and want him gone too. But many of my colleagues that continue to tell me that do not want a condition to aid. They give it to a genocidal maniac. My message to my colleagues is simple. If you don't support Netanyahu, if you're disgusted by the countless videos of lifeless children pulled out of the rubble, if you actually believe in upholding human rights and international law, vote no on a blank check to Netanyahu's genocide.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
Thank you.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I would say the folks that believe in genocide is Hamas. I yield to the gentleman from Florida, the chairman of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, Mr. Diaz-Balart, 2.5 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Let me first thank the gentleman from California, Chairman Calvert, for his leadership in drafting this critical bill, along with the Chairwoman Kay Granger, and the leadership for bringing this forward. As Mr. Calvert just said, yes, there has been genocide, but the genocide has been from Hamas, And if the world needed yet another reminder of the importance of Israel as a safe haven for the Jewish people, then the attacks of October 7th should be that wake-up call. This is not that complicated. I've been disgusted and shocked by some of the things that we've been hearing, including the sheer glee and displayed in celebrations across, even in this country, because of the murders of October. And remember, those grotesque celebrations and demonstrations happened before Israel even began its military action to defend Israelis, again in Gaza. So let's be clear. Those demonstrations, those statements, those celebrations were and are in favor of the terrorist group Hamas. The despicable anti-Semitism, which has been dramatically increased since October 7th, that we've even seen here sometimes on this floor, has to be condemned and has to stop. Israel is on the front line in the battle against terrorism. The terrorism of Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, you name it, and all of those, they continue to await for an opportunity to strike at Israel, as they have, just like they want to strike here to the American people in the United States. Israel and the United States do not want violence. But the problem is that the terrorists do, and they are the ones who have killed and butchered and maimed innocent Israelis. Again, last November, the House passed another Israel security supplemental, which was fully offset by a rescission of the IRS funding, and that was the reason why the White House claimed that they opposed that bill. Well, now there are zero excuses to oppose this bill. This bill does one thing, Mr. Speaker. It provides urgently needed funding for our friend and ally Israel to defeat the terrorists that they are dealing with. The United States must stand with Israel and to eradicate terrorism. This is not that complicated. You can use every excuse in the world and again with the purpose of supporting Hamas and justifying the murders. This bill stands with Israel. No ifs, no ands, no buts. I'm grateful to Chairman Calvert for bringing this important piece of legislation, and I wholeheartedly support it. I yield back.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the distinguished ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, Ms. Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her strong leadership. Mr. Speaker, I rise to oppose H.R. 7217. The United States and the world are facing a very dangerous time, with the risk of being pulled deeper and deeper into conflicts across the globe. Meanwhile, millions of people around the world are facing violence, dislocation, and hunger. This bill really is not a serious effort. As the ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I cannot support a bill that fails to meet the challenges of this moment and abandons those most in need of humanitarian assistance. And yes, this bill undermines the United States policy which supports a two-state solution. This bill is a blatant political stunt that is dead on arrival in the Senate. And so I urge my colleagues to oppose it. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
May I inquire how much time is left? Both sides.
Gentleman from California has 30 seconds. Gentlelady from Connecticut has 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, who has the right to close?
Reserve the right to close. Gentlelady from Connecticut.
Yes,
reserve.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
A short while ago, my colleague from Arkansas said it is our solemn duty to protect our allies. Indeed, it is our solemn duty to protect our allies. Our allies in this case are Israel, yes, and we support Israel. Our ally is Ukraine, and we need to continue to support Ukraine. Our ally is Taiwan, and we need to support Taiwan. We have a solemn duty, yes, to provide humanitarian assistance to innocent civilians. We have a solemn duty to protect our border. These are not the issues that are part of this bill. This bill does not meet those solemn obligations. My Republican colleagues do not want to help Ukraine or the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan. They do not want to address border security. They talked about border security as being the key to opening up the door to foreign assistance. They said it in the White House. The Speaker did that and now has walked away from it. It is really a political sham. They do not want to promote humanitarian assistance and leave millions of innocent civilians without food, shelter, clothing. In a conversation with the director of the World Food Organization, Cynthia McCain, she said, and I asked about Gaza, she said to me, Rosa, these people are starving. It is a famine. And I believe that is as well in this process of providing assistance to just Israel and not our other allies. They do hurt Israel and isolate Israel. It is time for my colleagues to be able to, on the other side of the aisle, to put our country and our national security ahead of partisan politics. What we should do is to vote this bill down. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Connecticut yields. Gentleman from California is recognized.
The gentlelady yields the balance of her time.
Yes, sir.
I'll close. The gentlelady is correct. This bill is not about Ukraine or Indo-PACOM or some other things that I would love to have some discussions about in the future. This is about Israel. And I think my friends on the other side of the aisle know I'm not a cynical person. I went about this, I've been in favor of moving an Israel bill for some time, and now is the time. I think it's just simply the right thing to do. And with that, let's pass this bill, let's support Israel, and I yield back the balance of my time.